dog example, if you turn off, they might, you don't know if they love you, but you know that they do. And in the same sense, if God is being Sarah, she wants to be closer, because she says she can be not be. Loving him, it's great.
So maybe you think my example that I used, it may not be clear. Like, it may be a case that she's doing it out of love, or may not, maybe she's doing it out of fear. I want some other comments. Yes?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, with regards to, like, abusive relationships, it's actually frequently both, like, loving and fear, particularly if like, the couple have children together. Because, yeah, on one hand, a reason why a woman may not leave a relationship is because she is afraid, because her abuser has made all these threats, like, oh, if you try to leave, like, I'll hurt the kids, or, like, I'll hurt your family, or whatever. But also, also often they do say because there was usually one point in the relationship where the abuse was not there, you know, and so they just want to, they remember the person before he or she started abusing, and so they still feel like they love that person because they may think, oh, well, you know, this hasn't always been around, so maybe it won't be around. So I think that, you know, that's not always the case. Sometimes in abusive relationships, the love between the two partners is completely gone, and the person being abused stays there simply out of fear. But sometimes love is part of the equation. But you know, it's such a complicated issue that it's really difficult to say whether or not you can't really say whether or not there's always love in the between the two people, even though there's abuse continuing. But
even though there's what?
There is. I was just gonna say, he had said that in an abusive relationship, like the person being abused may stay just because they're afraid of the abuser, not because they still feel loved, even though. But I was saying that sometimes it is the case. Sometimes the love is pretty much gone. But then other times the person being abused still loves their abuser because, because of, you know, they may have kids together, or like what happened, like because of like past memories where the abuse wasn't there, you know, and so they, you know, that person may still remember, you know, this is the man I married 20 years ago, and we were so in love back then, and he didn't hit me and everything, and so that person may also still feel, you know, oh, I wish that it would go back to that way. So I still love him, even though.
So I think we might have to distinguish between whether there are reasons for staying, and here, of course, we must distinguish between internal and external reasons. That makes a difference. So most of the time when we talk about internal reasons. External reasons would be more like correct reasons, like fact reasons. But if there are internal reasons for staying, you can kind of see why people are staying, but it's not clear that that doesn't make their love irrational. Was that also the point?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess what the discussion that we're kind of having, and one of the ideas that I'm trying to push is like, so maybe you have the emotion, and then I made the distinction between the emotion and maybe a decision that follows from the emotion. It seems clear at this stage to attribute whether something is rational or irrational.
Like you do that yourself. You mean like, it seems, right, it's a decision, a rational decision.
Right.
As opposed to is the love itself.
Is love the emotion itself? Can we talk about that in terms of rational and irrational? Because last time we did skits, so we did rational love, irrational love, and irrational and passionate love. And I'm just playing devil's advocate, and I just kind of want to see what they think. But I just argue that I don't really think we can talk about whether the emotion in and of itself is rational or irrational. I think that the emotion is what it is, and then, I mean, obviously the decision that follows from that, that's when we can talk about it.
Right. You mean decision and other actions?
Right.
Okay. So what about, someone who has a fear of flying? But decides that, so you can have a fear of flying, and let's even just assume for the sake of argument that that's irrational as we would say it is. And you should talk to the person, they'll keep maintaining that that they have a fear of flying, even you can try to argue with them, they are sort of dogmatic. So they border like being delusional about it. Well, actually maybe not delusional, because in that case, it's more the belief state than the emotional state. But at least they will not listen to you. I mean, they will listen to you, but it doesn't change their fear. But they also have other personality traits that can make them their strong-willed. So they decide that the fear will not interfere with their conference schedule. So they actually go on a plane, and then they have a lot of fear, but they go on the plane, and so they attend their conference schedule. So in effect, it doesn't affect their actions, but we would still have a tendency to say, well, your fear is still irrational. Your actions are good, but if you still sort of experience fear of that phenomenon, or more fear of that phenomenon than, say, driving, then that's irrational.
I feel like, and I could be wrong because you were totally the neuroscience here, but I just feel like the varying degrees to which someone experiences an emotion definitely depends on belief states, and you also said reasons. So like if a person has a fear of flying because they just believe, maybe they saw, what's that one movie where the plane blew up and then death was trying to kill everybody? Final Destination. I don't know. Maybe that's what they believe. They're going to get on this plane and the plane's going to blow up. And so then they have this fear, but maybe they don't really have good reasons, right? For believing that. They saw it in a fictional movie, and that's why they have it. I think that maybe the belief state or even the reasons, like somewhere around here is where I can talk about something being rational or irrational.
Yeah, and I think in many cases that's true too, but there are also lots and lots of cases where people, so in the fear of flying, people can often give reasons, even if they're good or bad. But there are also lots of emotions where people can't. Like, I mean, you hear that constantly, like, you tell someone, okay, the guy you're dating is a jerk, not in that many words, but the person's like, but I love him. But why? I don't know, I just love him.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, that's irrational. Anyway, so you can't describe in that case, there aren't reasons. I mean, there might be some beliefs about his goodness, but even that does not always hold up. So I think you're right that there are cases like that, where the rationality and the irrationality actually pertains to more traditional states like peace and that. But I think that there are cases where they don't.
Does everybody understand what we're talking about?
Well, love is an emotion. If you were to use it as a rational or irrational sense, I don't think just the emotion of love itself could be irrational. Maybe in which you place it could be irrational, but just love as an emotion could be irrational. Only because there will be other emotions also be able to be rational. For example, if you feel scared for some reason, you're scared for a reason. Maybe that reason might not be rational, but you're scared. And you are scared for whatever reason.
So scared is a special version of being afraid.
Yeah, and I feel like that's rational. No matter what it is, it's rational to have that feeling or feel that emotion. But whatever is causing that may be what is irrational.
But what about kids who are scared and then the parents come into the room, so they're scared of the monsters in the closet, and then the dad and the mom come into the room and they show, okay, look, there are no monsters. The monsters in that closet, no monsters under the bed. And then in some cases it helps the kids to like stop being scared. So that's that being scared was irrational because they were scared of something that wasn't there. And they were even willing to listen to evidence in some cases, right? I mean,
I think maybe, because I agree with you, because that's pretty much my argument. I think maybe the way we're thinking about rational is when you have a belief state and you have reasons and the emotion that follows from it, the emotion that follows from your reasons, whether they're absurd or not, is the appropriate response given those reasons. So, you know, maybe the kid is afraid of the closet because the reasons are they believe there are monsters in the closet. The fear that follows from that is the appropriate response given those reasons, even though these reasons may be completely irrational. There are no monsters in the closet.
Right. But that's not how I would defend like emotions, because then emotions are directed at an object. And so when you have reasons, there's this direction, so this intentional direction towards an object, just as we don't just love, we love something or someone, or we don't just, I guess maybe we could hate, just hate. But you know, usually we hate something or some institution or some person or some part of one's life, or so that's this thing that we can also turn into a reason if we asked. But I think that it's part of the emotion that it is directed, just like perception is directed at something. So I think that the emotion already is directed at these things, that the kid doesn't just have fear of nothing, and then
it's directed at some thing, some object.
So it's a perception of the kid, I mean a misperception in this case, of monsters causing whatever he's feeling.
Okay.
Which is consistent with that further level. What I'm claiming is that sometimes that further level isn't there. So in this case, of course, it's there because the mom comes in and say, "Why are you afraid?" And so you sort of force that to come up.
No, just a quick question. So I'm agreeing with you. Like, it seems like sometimes we experience emotion and we're not always aware of the reasons.
Yeah.
So it seems like there are times where there are cases where I experience emotion and the reasons are clear. And then there are times where I experience emotion and the reasons aren't clear as I'm experiencing, or maybe as I perceive the object and then I experience this emotion. And maybe through reflection is when I get these reasons.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, can these reasons still be prevalent within me even if I'm not consciously aware of them?
I think they could, but I think they come closer to being similar to some of the states that are involved in an emotion. So, I mean, that obviously is a controversial view, whether reasons can be unconscious or John Doris, or Rick Wash, you would say yes, and Eric Wilder would say no. I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made here. I just wanted to make clear that I don't rule out that this can happen actually, even in most cases.
Right, I got you. It's just, you're just saying that this may not be prevalent in all cases.
Or it may be that there's just some cases where it doesn't hold up, and then a theory that only had that wouldn't be correct, couldn't handle the other cases. Whereas a theory that that allows emotions themselves to be rational and irrational, that does not rule out that beliefs and reasons can also be at the same time rational and irrational. But it could even be that all cases can be described in that way, but that would be sort of a case to be made, and that's definitely, that would be an objection, for sure.
So what me and Britt are doing right now is that we're disagreeing. And there's a talk today.
A disagreement.
There's a talk today on what is disagreement. So if you guys are interested in more philosophy, I definitely invite you to come.
This is sort of a meta talk. So this is like, what are we disagreeing about? It's as I only read it through the first few lines of the paper, but it didn't seem to be just philosophical disagreement. I was like, is that alright? Did you read the paper?
I read the first few lines. I was like,
okay, that's what I mean. Okay, but I get the impression that it's not supposed to be just about philosophical agreement. It's supposed to be agreement also more generally, like when people disagree. Call it philosophical or political or whatever. I don't think, and I talked to him yesterday because I had to pick him up in the airport, and he said that he always at least made an attempt to make this talk accessible without having read the paper. So you could show up anyway. If you're around and you're bored at 4 o'clock, it's in the big tower. Where's that?
SSB tower.
Yeah, SSB does that tower.
1312.
Take it to the 13th floor. And that's where the talk will take place. And yeah, this is a professor from Harvard, but he promised the talk would be accessible, so we hope that this sense of accessible is not like up here.
Yeah.
No, I think he's used to like giving talks in various places in the country, so I think he probably has a good sense of
Sorry, anyway, we digress. So does anybody have any more comments or questions about this?
So I just wanted to also just a couple of announcements. We didn't upload the full manuscript yet, right? No. So we are now allowed to upload the full manuscript because it's good news. So you don't have to pay whatever that would have cost you, which would have been cheap because it was one of those mainstream publishers anyway. But we'll upload the full manuscript. We now have permission to do that because I moved publishers. So I moved to an academic publisher because obviously the other publisher didn't deliver the book for the course that I was supposed to use it, so I couldn't wait for that. And well, what also was annoying that they didn't deliver was also that they said, yeah, you can't upload the manuscript, and at the same time they didn't come out with the book. So it was sort of like begging them each time to be uploaded each chapter, but now we can upload the whole thing. So I'm going to do that either today or tomorrow. And then there'll be more chapters. So we wrap the chapter on whether emotions can be rational or irrational, but that's also chapters on the unconscious, whether emotions can be unconscious, and also a chapter that I actually have come to like. That was my least favorite chapter when I wrote the book, but now I like it a lot more. So it's the idea of love coming in degrees that might potentially solve a lot of disagreements in relationships that don't have like deeper problems. Like if you ask someone like, "Do you love me?" Right? It's not if it's a degree notion. Well, you can say yes, but there can be degrees, so it's not always a definite answer. And you may not love the very, very same person sitting on the same day. I think that people sometimes don't operate with that notion in their minds, and that they think that there should be this very clear answer, do you love me? And it's like, yes or no, right? And so sort of trying to flesh out why it's not that way. There's two pieces of evidence, one more convincing than the other, and one is the so-called prototype theory of the 1970s. And that goes back to a psychologist, Rush, and her colleagues, and they were really sick and tired of philosophers, because philosophers would have this tendency to define everything, down to the smallest detail. And so philosophers would always ask for a concept or a notion. Can you give us necessary and sufficient conditions, right? So if you're trying to define what a person is, and you put down, it's someone with a social security number, the philosopher would be like, that doesn't work, because a social security number, that's sufficient, assuming that only people have social security numbers. Having a social security number is sufficient for being a person, but it's not necessary, right? And then other people would put down, a person is someone who's alive. Doesn't work, right? Trees are alive, that might be necessary that you're alive to be a person, but it's not sufficient. So they were always asking about these like necessary and sufficient conditions, and Ross was really tired of that because she thought that's not how we work. So folk psychology does not work that way. So what she did was she started these enormous studies that range from animals to furniture and all kinds of categories of things that you would think of. And what she would do was that she would have these lists for even items, more sophisticated cases, but usually lists of words. So she would take like one main category, say furniture, And then so we have all these words listed underneath in random order. So you would have chair, table. So you would even have like typewriter, so writing some of these typewriter, or telephone, or rock, or carpets, and so on, and mats, and bookshelves, and drawers, and closets, and building closets, and walk-in closets, and all kinds of things. And then you would have subjects, and research subjects, you would have to rank them. So which is the best example of a piece of furniture? Some piece or some words could get the same ranking. So she didn't ask me to say, oh, a table is better than a chair. If you thought they were equally good, you just could put one for both of those. But if you thought that, a computer, or back then a typewriter, was not quite as good of an example of a piece of furniture, that would get a lower number. And so she did that with birds as well, and all kinds of everyday categories. And so she found out that very, very, very many concepts, also more abstract concepts than the concepts that I mentioned, they don't have. So when you define something as having necessary sufficient conditions, so philosophers' favorite example, which there also can be counterexample too, is like that bachelors. Let's make it a little more sophisticated. Bachelors are never married, just to rule out, this may not even be right, but are never married males, adult males, right? Because people with common examples. So something like, and never married here, married adult males who were not Catholic priests. I mean, there might be other religions where male priests can get married. I don't know about Greek or Orthodox whether they can or not. But you get the idea. So we get, if we add a few more clauses, we get sort of a decent, definition of what a bachelor is. And should I put that? So this is one of the, actually the original example was just that. Bachelors are unmarried males. And then he would say, well, but what about kids? Are they really bachelors? And then he would say, what about Catholic priests? Are they really bachelors? And what about divorced men? Are they really men? Are they really bachelors? And so on. So it became a little more complicated. But you get the idea that it shouldn't be impossible to get a definition that has everything that's necessary in here and everything that's sufficient for being a bachelor. Or if you don't like that example, we can go to something even more easy, like what is it to be an even number? Go back to high school and think of what is it to be an even number? Well, a number is even if it can be divided by the number 2, right? Is that right? Okay. So there we have necessary sufficient conditions. It's not going to fail, and philosophers like that, and Liddell and Rush in the 70s was like, okay, maybe, math works that way. And maybe your nicely defined little bachelor concepts that really are refined concepts work that way. But we have so many things in our everyday lives, and they just don't work that way. And so we don't get these categories. So the idea was for philosophers to get these nice categories. You've ever seen Venn diagrams? Maybe some of you are taking logic, right? You can put all S's and P's in categories nicely, and then you can say S and P. So S is one category of things, and P is a different category of things. Now you see, they overlap, they have members in common, and stuff like that. So you can do all this nice stuff that they will do in logic and other places, and philosophers still do it, but she found out, well, it doesn't work for many concepts. She wasn't the first to find out. She did empirical studies in the 1970s showing that it didn't work. But that was a philosopher many years before her called Wittgenstein. He was also the one who actually ended up hitting little kids in an elementary school later on. But anyway, so Wittgenstein argued that concepts weren't always like that. And his favorite example was the example of game. And he challenged people to come up with a definition of game that would not either sort of be too broad and reduce it to play, and would not be too strict and leave out obvious games, and people still struggle to do that. And so he would say that it's a so-called family resemblance concept. So the idea is that there was a family of things, so we have this fussy category, and in here we have all the games, soccer and board games and computer games and what have you. And it's fussy because there might also be some out here that are not really games, some that are on the border, and so on. So it's all like a little fussy here. But there's some that are in the center, so we say, is a soccer game a game? Yeah, that seems like a pretty good, fair example of a game. Most board games seem like very good examples of games. But then there will be other things that don't have, we can win. I mean, there's some things that look like games, you can't win. That's something you play in the schoolyard, you can't really win. You can be good at it, but you can't really win, and so on. And so they would like more towards periphery because they would be in the same family and they would look like the main examples, but they are not quite in the center. Okay, so that Eleanor Ross picked up on that, and then she said she invented a different name for it that she liked better. So Ross was the end of 70s. So I forget if that's an essay in here, I think so. Yeah, either with it or without an S. This would be 1900, of course. 77, I think it says one of the publications came out there. This is a psychologist. And she called it prototype theory. Same idea. So after all the experiments, he would find out that when he had rated or given these surveys to 100 people, people would tend to take chairs and tables to be really good examples of furniture. But they would say that telephones and vacuum cleaners and building closets maybe were not quite as good examples of furniture, so they would be out here either sort of in the border, in the fussy area, and in here we would have, dresses and chairs and tables. Maybe lamps would be sort of fairly good still, but not the first ones that came to mind. So we did that with animals as well, and found, the prototype of a bird and so on, supposedly the robin. It's very, very fun to read. But the thing is, this is supposed to apply also to more abstract concepts like love, but very few people have done that. And it seems that if we really have this way of thinking about the world, that we don't think about the world the way that logicians and hardcore analytic philosophers and mathematicians will have us think about the world. We think about it in a much more sort of, okay, these are really good examples, and then there are these other things that resemble them. Think about the world that way, then a thing like love, that's one of the most common things in society, right? It's been around forever. Before chairs, right? Tables. probably before robins, chickens, right? So love has just been around forever, and so it would not be surprising if that was also a prototype concept. And so we did a little fun experiment which you can read about, which is actually mostly funny, but I mean the experiment was gone fairly, and it's just that the results are a little funny, the way that people actually think about them. And you might recognize that. It might not be the way you like to think about love, but this is quite a few research subjects that's involved. And they were unsuspecting of all this, so there were people in a love class or any other class, and there's people who did something else, even people with mathematics, whatever. So they think of love in the way that we might say, sadly, it's portrayed in happy ending Hollywood movies. So what they did in this one experiment was, it was supposed to be a pilot experiment, it ended up being really big. So think of it as preliminary to do an even bigger one. We showed them clips from movies. We didn't have to have seen the movie before or not, but we noted whether they had or not. And two very famous movies, so it would be likely, at least if some of them, they were not all the same age either, so it would be likely that some of them would at least have seen trailers from it, if not the movie itself. And since not all of them were your age, but they were sort of spread out in age ranges, even the movies that were old, I mean, there would be a good group of people who had probably seen the movies. So we would have a scene where from, Sleepless in Seattle, where they run back, they almost don't meet each other at the very end, they forget the backpack and run back and find the backpack and embrace, and we would have things like, we would also have sort of slightly sexually explicit scenes, no pornography, but like from when Sally met Harry, and there was this fake orgasm scene at a restaurant, and we had a very, very heartfelt scene with a very, very troubled couple who had a son with epilepsy, and the whole family was falling apart, but finally there was a solution, and there's now this very heartfelt, warm phone call where they say, for the first time in a very long time, they say to each other they love each other. Things like that, and there were other things that were, so it was spanning from these sort of slightly sexually charged scenes to, they were also with kids, actually. There was the, from also an older movie, the big custody battle movie of all times, I forget what it's called right now. But at some point, when one of the parents had this very, very, very emotionally charged breakfast with the son, because he's basically his poor parents getting divorced, was in there and so on. And so we have a bunch of these Sleepless in Seattle movies, or email, what was it called again? You have mail. I don't have mail. It's another. New York, but not that York. You ever seen that one, right? Have you have mail? I have mail. There you go. So the one where there's a mail coming up, isn't it something? These are still okay, so they have some newer ones that either you don't see those movies or you must have heard of it. This is P.S. I Love You. More familiar? Okay, so we also have a scene where the husband is dead and he finds one of his notes that he wrote when he was alive. A scene like that, and so we have a bunch of other scenes like that. But, so we had them actually do when we were arrested, we didn't just have them say, okay, is this love or not? Right? So we had various categories: sexual love, true love, romantic love, warm love, desire love. I mean, we had like a whole bunch. And people could just, they cross it all up. So they tend to put things like P.S. I Love You and Sleepless in Seattle. They all happy get each other in the end. into categories like romantic love, not so surprising. But it was that kind of movie that ended up in the category of true love. So not even, true love wasn't even like with the son, with his soon-to-be divorced parents, breakfast, one of them. It was not these two middle-aged parents who have struggled for their kid and had to split the family, and now they were on their way back towards each other, and they had this very, very warm and deep-felt, heartfelt connection and said, I love you to each other. No true love. This doesn't show anything about how things ought to be. This shows, I mean, out of all those subjects that we interviewed, it shows that when people are not in a class like this, that's how people think. And they might not even think about it explicitly because nobody knows if they would even have given it a thought before we asked them, right? So when you meet someone, it's just sitting there in the back of their minds that their life is not exactly like the Hollywood romantic endings, and of course it always ends there, right? So they get married, unless it starts with marriage, it always ends with a marriage, and then they live happily ever after. You don't get to see any of the other stuff. And so when things go wrong, that's not unsurprising, right? People deep down, if that's how they think of love. So anyway, so that's one of the chapters, and you can read ahead and so on. And then there's a chapter on attachment styles, avoidant and anxious attachment styles. And there's also a chapter on whether we can control our emotions indirectly. So, since we covered the rationality chapter pretty well, we could move on to we can always come back. I mean, some of the topics overlap, obviously. So, I was thinking we should do the chapter on unconscious emotions because that's also a rather controversial issue. And what I used to say to people when I am just joking around with them, if they say, of course there can't be unconscious emotions, and as I say it in the introduction as well, well, imagine if your spouse asks you, do you love me? And you respond, yeah, maybe about 3 seconds during coffee break in the morning, and occasionally, there's a break with the NPR and the radio and we home. And after the kids are put to bed, and I'm done finishing up my work, and finishing the dishes, and we finally sit down and see some TV, and we find out that, and we think, oh yeah, actually, I love you. I mean, it's not the typical answer, right? Because it seems that, hey, but you loved me all along, didn't you? I mean, it's not just those 3 points during the day that you love me. But if we were to force people to say, when did you think consciously, explicitly about loving the other person, it's not going to be that many times unless you're like very newly in love. So that just indicates, again, if we go by folk psychology, we can't always do that, but if we just go by that it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And some of the philosophers who argue that it should be unconscious and that emotions should be unconscious, they always refer to these situations where they're very conscious. So they refer to that kind of situation, for instance, where you are immediately angry with someone. So someone pisses you off beyond belief on the street or in a bar or whatever, and that anger you feel right there and then. Or, there's a snake in front of you and you fear it right there and then. But none of the other emotions work that way either, right? I mean, we can go have a grudge against a person for a very long time. Right? We can really be angry with a person for a very long time. We might even almost have forgotten how angry we are with that person. And so then we are left to say, well, is it that we are angry and then we're not angry, and then we're angry, and then we're not angry? Presumably not. Presumably it just disappears from the mind and becomes kind of unconscious. It doesn't have to be so unconscious that it's inaccessible, we'll talk about that too, because some of the stuff that these old psychoanalysis dealt with, that was really far out, right? Doesn't have to be that unconscious. It just has to be something that disappears from mind, to be unconscious, or maybe even unattended to, but we'll talk more about that in that mistake. So that's basically what I think I'll say a little bit about that next time, because that's really interesting. There's a lot of literature on that in various areas, almost in any area now. I've started talking about unconscious this and unconscious that, unconscious decision making, unconscious agency, and how we don't know what we really are doing. And if you see some of the short net talks, they call net talks, they're really short, 15 minutes, where they usually have a really good speaker in. I mean, 80% of those are about how we do stuff, how we didn't know that we were doing stuff. A book we read recently, The Hidden Mind, has a fancy subtitle about like how the hidden brain elects presidents, and there's a whole other, a whole list of things. So this is quite a popular topic, and it seems that it should be relevant to love, and also to maybe how we behave in love situations, and what that can lead to. So I think we should talk a bit about that next time, right? We can return more to the rational, irrational, which is also really interesting, which might be relevant in the case too. Since you took the discussion at the beginning of class, I should ask, do you have something you want to say now? Do you have more technical questions, like you're confused about this discussion board, exercises make no sense, why didn't I grade them? I actually did grade them in my car, but it's not. Yeah, nothing? Well, feel free if something is confusing to you, or doesn't make sense, rather than correct it. Occasionally people do email us, and it's simply something we forgot to do. So one person emailed and said, hey, are you going to post more questions on the discussion board? And I was like, yeah, thanks for reminding us. That was meant to do that. So things like that. So just tell us, because in the majority of cases, probably because we're about to get to it and just didn't get to it. So I think we can call it a day, and then we'll I'll upload that chapter to be up today or tomorrow. I mean, not chapter, the whole book. Yeah.
If you haven't signed the sign-up sheet, it's right here at the front. Be sure to do so.